help them and increase their awareness. It can be more technical tools that NGOs can use when working to develop carbon projects on social impact assessment. It can be the uptake in latest technology, like working with Google to get various elements of the Google Outreach and Google Earth Engine, Google Earth Builder onto tablets and use them as means to understand and monitor carbon at the community level. And even more technical things like understanding carbon accounting methodologies, calculating baselines, projecting deforestation. So when we get talked to by companies or asked by companies, what can you do to help us on climate change, they're usually thinking about three different things that they're exploring. On one hand, they're looking at developing a strategy, climate policy, identifying how much greenhouse gas exposure is in their supply chain, how they can reduce it, and they want to do something meaningful in terms of land use. And so they may want to do a carbon project to generate credits that they can use for their own footprint, and they may want to do this in their supply chain. Or they may be thinking of contributing to projects or carbon credit acquisition somewhere outside of their supply chain. And I think NGOs can help on all three of those aspects. So I think the inflection points that we see, and some of these are very close to what Jared has already mentioned, is we can work in helping businesses set their policy, set their strategy. We can then be on the field with boots on the ground in remote locations, doing some of the assessment of the various opportunities that present themselves. And equally, we can be implementing and implementers and work with partners, partner NGOs, smaller NGOs to implement. And provide a monitoring and evaluation framework that can help measure progress. And then communicate about the results and successes. So these are the types of things we see happening in climate by organizations that are working with land use and land use change. Mapping out climate policies, charting the supply chain, or looking at sourcing issues, trying to vet out risks, and to come up with strategies, come up with commitments and measurable targets around emissions reductions, and pushing for and advocating best practice, best standards, helping people to navigate the differences between certain standards and make good choices. When it comes down to assessment, there's a lot of things that NGOs can potentially do. We can bring our expertise in life cycle assessment, if that is what we do, tracing the embodied carbon from the farm level all the way up to the cup. If that's what we're talking about. Or carbon footprinting, perhaps just select portions of the supply chain or select portions of an organizational carbon footprint can be assessed, and NGOs can work with that. We can also help with the needs assessment with the producers. What do people who are small farmers need in order to meet these standards? Or what do they need to know in order to develop a carbon project? NGOs often have that expertise and can help. And then feasibility. Do we actually have an opportunity to mitigate carbon within a particular farm, within a particular processing center, within a particular community forestry operation? Then we can be involved in the technical implementation. With carbon and carbon projects, there's an extremely exacting set of rules and requirements around methodologies, because people want to see that tons that are being traded in emissions trading schemes or even for voluntary offsets, that these things are verifiable and measurable, reputable. That's complicated stuff, and we can help with that. We can help with the design and the development of carbon projects. And we can also be a cultural intermediary, and help bring the connections between the investment community or companies that are looking for projects to support and on-the-ground activities that we can have. Then the so important. NGOs frequently are watchdogs. We can do more than just be watchdogs. We can help build through results-based management approaches, developing theory of change, causal models. We can help to monitor and evaluate progress on measurable targets. We can do impact and research studies together with companies. We can ensure their conformance to verification standards. And then, when all is said and done, we can really help be a voice to share the information, whether it's widely to the general public, through the press and social media, whether it's various publications and distribution of information, videos and other channels, and then finally through the marketplace of ideas, all these international networks that we have to help get the news out about the various successes. So that's where I'd like to close things. I wanted to be clear that the Rainforest Alliance is really only working with land use, sustainable landscapes, and the intersection of where we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by better forestry and better farming. And we are not dealing with all the sectors of the economy, but we do see these particular sectors extremely vital, and many other sectors that want to have an influence in conservation will find themselves attracted to promoting better forestry and better farming, because farms and forests are extremely vital to connectivity of ecosystems and larger conservation objectives. Thank you very much. I want to also mention to you that you can get a free cup of high-quality Nespresso at an event that they're having at 2:15 at the Nespresso Pavilion, and it will be Rainforest Alliance certified coffee.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And the last presenter on this session is Christoph Imboden. Christoph is an ecologist by training and has been associated to IUCN for a very, very long time. He currently also chairs the IUCN Holston Biodiversity Advisory Panel, and he's going to talk to us about how you strike the balance between scientific rigor and practicality.
Thank you, Mariana, and thank you too for your emergency exit explanations. I have to ask your boss, where are the hard hats? You have these times on here. Anyway, good morning to everybody. Yes, this is in fact a big issue. When you're working as a conservation organization with business community, that sometimes you have to rethink, how you act and what you do as a scientist. Well, rigor, scientific rigor, these are the few things which I found on the internet, but the last one is particularly interesting. Robustness is the characteristics of being strong enough to withstand intellectual challenge, which I think we always have to uphold. But then, there is the other side of practicality. And business, after all, is something very practical. It has to produce outputs and it has to produce money in the end. And the problem we face as a scientist is that there is a sort of a large grey area in between. And, the constant questions which we face as scientists is, where do we find a reasonable balance between the two? Now, you all know the law of the diminishing return. The scientist, by training, is used to achieve as possible, if possible, 100% accuracy. But the law is that you spend 20% of your time to get 80% accuracy, and then you spend 80% of the time to get the last 20% of accuracy. Well, we have heard today a lot from IUCN how you engage with business, you first have to convince them that biodiversity is in fact something which has to do with them. And then, second step is to have to motivate them that they should do something about it. But most importantly, you don't do this by showing, the negative side, the harm they do, but you really concentrate on, what they can do positively for biodiversity. And very often, they can. You have to steer them towards quick wins. You have to show them benefits of integrated approach. And then you have to demonstrate them that implementation is affordable and that simple methods can lead to meaningful outcomes. And this is really what I want to briefly show by means of the work we have done with the Holcim Cement Company. Now, one thing we developed for the cement company, basically a life cycle approach to biodiversity, including biodiversity issues in their operations from A to Z. And I'm not going to explain, this whole system. I'm just going to show two examples. The one about biodiversity inventories, because if you want to do something about biodiversity or avoid negative impacts on biodiversity, you have to first know what biodiversity you are responsible for. So I'm going to say something about biodiversity inventories, and then of course you have to monitor what you are doing to see whether it is having the desired effect. So the first example of the biodiversity inventories. Now, there is of course, as a scientist ecologist, I know pretty well how I have to assess biodiversity, but how practical is this to do over 500 sites worldwide, like in the case of the Holcim Cement Company. Now you can sort of build up sort of a list and say what is the absolute basic information you need, is habitat maps, for instance. And then, there is a whole string of things which you can do, information going more deeply all the time into detail, which from a scientific point of view is all, great stuff to do and also very important to have. But we also have, the question is, in the case of a company which has 550 sites worldwide, we have the question, what is better? To have a lot of information about a few sites, or to have some kind of basic information about all sites. And a research scientist might of course say, well, we want to have lots of information about all the sites. The company, of course, says, well, we want to get as little information, or just only the basic information on as few sites as possible. A company which is, for instance, not convinced that they have anything to do with biodiversity. Then, the conservation scientist might be somewhere in between, but the conservation pragmatist, as I call it, might even be, more to the right and to the bottom. So, this is basically an issue, or has been an issue, which has been very much in the foreground of our discussions within this scientific panel developing this system for the company. And also, very important, we have constantly played back our ideas and thoughts to the company, actually in order to test how practical is it in fact what we have in mind. I said, there are a lot of boundary conditions here. When we talk about this, 520 sites worldwide, a very wide range of, sizes. Some sites, being only only used for a few years, less than 10 years, others are being used for more than 100 years. The surrounding conditions are very different. What I'm saying is, you know, there is a big diversity of sites, and of course, a scientist thinks, oh, this is exciting, but doesn't realize, you know, if you want to go into a lot of detail, how much time, in fact, this takes. So we actually said to them that they have to identify the biodiversity importance of their own sites, but we had to propose a system which is very easy to apply, a system which relies on information which the company itself actually can get from the internet. So we have come up with a classification of 1 to 4, which basically relies on the information available through the IUCN rate listing process, information through the data bank on world protected areas, and that, in a way, is all what we could suggest to them. Anything else, anything going further, and as a scientist, I can, you know, think of many ways how this could be made more precise, would mean that they would have to employ expertise, which in fact they might not be able to afford for 520 different sites. Don't forget, cement production is a high volume, low margin kind of commodity. So it's not like, you know, mining for gold where you invest a lot of money and have a lot of return for that. So we face, you know, quite a different situation than in other parts of the mining sector. Okay, we developed a biodiversity risk matrix for them, which on the one side, you know, shows something about, you know, shows the classification of biodiversity importance versus the likely impact and the likely impact the operations are going to have, and the likelihood that you can mitigate against this impact. In fact, these columns are based on another matrix, which I'm not going to show you, but what I want to show you is that in the end, you know, we had to cut across a lot of complexities and coming up with a simple system which the company can operationalize. Now, we are now working, and I come to the second example, on the monitoring, because we say any management system only makes sense if you actually monitor what you are doing. So the key requirements here are listed. You know, it must be meaningful, not straightforward to measure, sensitive to changes, and simple methodologies, and most importantly, it must be a system which can be largely implemented by the company itself, because they are not going to be able to monitor through the use of experts in 520 sites worldwide. So, again, the problem we face, we reviewed you know, a lot of different methodologies published in the literature, and we found that, you know, there are methods which are, you know, scientifically very rigorous but not very practical, and, you know, all these methods would be plotted like this. Ideally, we would find something in the top right-hand corner, but, you know, we have to say there is nothing up there. So we have to start to design our own system, and, you know, where we constantly balance simplicity versus rigor, affordability versus, you know, something expensive, and also other issues are coming into it, you know, like the expectations from local communities, which might be very often different than the expectations from a conservation community, or the needs, wishes, possibility of a company versus local legal requirements. So a lot of balancing has to be done here. The system which we are now in the process of developing is one where we try to find or come up with very simple measures of habitat condition, which, with some initial guidance from experts, they can actually apply themselves on a regular basis. And, you know, monitoring is something which you have to repeat at constant intervals. In our case, we propose every year. And in order to make it practical, it has to be able, the system has to be implemented by the company itself, by company staff itself. So, the big challenge is to find something where, the staff can actually look at and assess habitat condition in order to see how they are progressing. And, the system we came up with was something like 2 staff members doing an assessment once a year, and the assessment is based on simple questions where they have some pictorial guidance, which they have to assess in the field, and these sort of questions, this is an example of pictorial guides, which we propose to develop, pictorial guides on, this is in the case of grassland and presence of flowering species, which will say something about the quality of the habitat itself. Or here another, a grassland is not very healthy if it is continuously invaded with bushes, and so, a simple